Hello there, and welcome to Cosmic Slumber. Tonight we are sinking down into the cool, quiet world beneath the forest floor, where mushrooms rise softly from the dark. What we call a mushroom is really only a small, temporary part of something much larger, a vast hidden network of threads spreading silently through soil and rotting wood, connecting trees, feeding forests, and quietly recycling the dead back into the living. Some mushrooms glow faintly in the dark. Some can live for thousands of years without ever being fully seen. Some communicate with trees in a slow, chemical language that predates almost everything we consider modern life. The closer we look at this soft, patient kingdom, the less it resembles anything we casually walk past on a forest trail, and the more it feels like an entire hidden civilization quietly working beneath our feet. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or leave a thought below. It helps other sleepy minds find their way here, too, one quiet spore at a time. But for now, all you need to do is relax. Let your shoulders soften. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your thoughts sink slowly downward, past the fallen leaves, into the dark, damp soil where mushrooms are quietly, patiently growing. Let's begin. A mushroom is only the visible fruit of a much larger organism hidden underground. What most people call a mushroom is really just the temporary, above-ground reproductive structure of a fungus, comparable to an apple growing on a tree. The true body of the organism, called the mycelium, spreads invisibly through soil, wood, or leaf litter, often far more extensive and far longer lived than the small, familiar cap and stem we happen to notice above the surface. Mycelium is made up of extremely fine, thread-like structures called hyphae. These delicate threads branch and spread continuously through their surroundings, forming a dense, interconnected web that can stretch for a surprisingly long distance, absorbing nutrients directly through their thin walls as they slowly extend outward through soil, decaying wood, or other organic material. Fungi are not plants, despite often being grouped alongside them in casual conversation. Genetically, fungi are actually considered more closely related to animals than to plants, sharing certain fundamental cellular characteristics with animal life that plants do not possess. This surprising classification places mushrooms in their own entirely distinct biological kingdom, separate from both the plant and animal worlds most people are more familiar with. The largest known living organism on Earth is not a whale or a tree, but a single fungus. A honey fungus discovered in Oregon spreads across an enormous underground area, believed to be thousands of years old and covering several square miles of forest soil entirely with a single connected mycelial network, making it, by many measures, the largest continuous living organism ever documented. That same enormous fungal organism may be several thousand years old. Based on its estimated growth rate and total spread, researchers believe this particular fungal network could be anywhere from roughly 2,000 to nearly 9,000 years old, meaning it may have been quietly spreading through the same forest soil since long before many of history's earliest recorded civilizations first began. Mushrooms release spores, tiny reproductive particles far too small to see individually with the naked eye. Rather than seeds in the way plants use them, fungi reproduce primarily through spores, released from the underside or interior of the mushroom in enormous quantities, carried away by wind, water, or passing animals to potentially begin an entirely new fungal colony somewhere else entirely. A single mushroom can release billions of spores over the course of its short life. Because the vast majority of released spores will never successfully land somewhere suitable for growth, mushrooms compensate by producing an enormous surplus, sometimes numbering in the billions from a single mushroom alone, dramatically increasing the overall odds that at least a small handful will find their way to a hospitable new location. Some mushroom spores can remain dormant for years before finally germinating under the right conditions. Rather than germinating immediately after release, certain fungal spores can persist in a dormant, inactive state for an extended period, patiently waiting in soil or leaf litter until moisture, temperature, and other environmental conditions finally align favorably enough to trigger active growth. Mushrooms can appear seemingly overnight, though the underlying fungal network has usually been growing for a long time beforehand. While a visible mushroom cap can genuinely seem to emerge from bare ground within a single day or two, this rapid appearance typically reflects the final, fast-growing fruiting stage of a mycelial network that may have already been quietly developing underground for weeks, months, or considerably longer. A mushroom can grow rapidly by rapidly absorbing water into already formed cells, rather than needing to build entirely new cellular material from scratch. Because much of a mushroom's cellular structure is essentially preformed within the underground mycelium before it ever breaks through the surface, the visible growth spurt many people notice largely reflects rapid water absorption and cell expansion, rather than the comparatively slower process of building brand new tissue entirely from the ground up. Fungal networks can connect the root systems of entirely separate trees, allowing them to share resources. Certain fungi form a mutually beneficial relationship with tree roots called mycorrhizae, extending the effective reach of a tree's root system while simultaneously connecting multiple separate trees together through a shared underground fungal network, sometimes informally referred to by researchers as the Wood Wide Web. Trees connected through shared fungal networks can transfer nutrients and even chemical warning signals to one another. Research suggests that trees linked by mycorrhizal fungal networks can share resources such as carbon and nutrients, and in some studied cases, may even transmit chemical signals related to insect attack or environmental stress, potentially allowing neighboring trees some advance warning of a threat before it directly reaches them. Older, larger trees sometimes appear to preferentially support younger, smaller trees through these same shared fungal networks. Some research has suggested that larger, more established trees may direct additional resources towards smaller, younger trees connected through the same mycorrhizal network, occasionally described informally by researchers as a kind of forest mother tree phenomenon, though the full extent and mechanisms behind this behavior remain an active area of ongoing scientific study. Fungi play an essential role in breaking down dead organic material and recycling nutrients back into the ecosystem. Without fungi steadily decomposing fallen leaves, dead wood, and other organic debris, forests would gradually become buried under an ever-increasing accumulation of undecomposed material, unable to recycle essential nutrients back into the soil where living plants depend on them for continued healthy growth. Some fungi are capable of breaking down lignin, one of the toughest, most decay-resistant components found in wood. Lignin provides structural rigidity to trees and is notoriously difficult for most organisms to break down. Certain specialized fungi, however, produce powerful enzymes specifically capable of breaking apart lignin's complex structure, making them essential decomposers uniquely equipped to break down fallen wood that would otherwise persist largely unchanged for an extremely long time. Fungi were likely among the very first organisms to move from water onto land, long before plants or animals followed. Some researchers believe early fungi may have helped pave the way for plant life to successfully establish itself on dry land, breaking down early mineral surfaces and contributing to the very first soil-like conditions capable of eventually supporting more complex terrestrial plant life. Mushrooms come in an extraordinarily wide range of colors, including bright blues, deep purples, and vivid reds rarely associated with typical forest scenery. While many people picture mushrooms primarily in muted browns and whites, certain species display genuinely striking, vivid coloration, sometimes serving as a visual warning related to toxicity, and sometimes without any fully understood specific evolutionary purpose at all. Some mushrooms glow faintly in the dark, a phenomenon known as bioluminescence. Certain fungal species produce a soft, greenish glow visible in complete darkness, caused by a chemical reaction occurring within their tissue. Though the exact evolutionary purpose remains debated, some researchers suggest this faint glow may help attract insects capable of assisting with spore dispersal. Bioluminescent mushrooms have inspired old folklore describing mysterious glowing lights appearing deep within forests at night. Long before science fully explained the underlying chemistry, glowing fungi found on rotting logs likely contributed to various regional folk stories describing eerie, unexplained lights spotted in forests after dark, a natural phenomenon that must have seemed genuinely mysterious to early observers without any modern scientific explanation available. Some mushrooms are edible and highly prized, while others are dangerously toxic, sometimes with very few obvious visual differences between them. Distinguishing safely edible mushroom species from dangerously toxic ones can be genuinely difficult, even for experienced foragers, since some toxic species closely resemble edible ones in appearance, making expert identification and considerable caution essential before ever consuming any wild mushroom. The deathcap mushroom is responsible for a significant proportion of fatal mushroom poisonings worldwide. Containing potent toxins that severely damage the liver, the deathcap mushroom is considered one of the most dangerous mushroom species in the world, particularly concerning because its taste is reportedly not unpleasant, and its early symptoms of poisoning may not appear until considerable, sometimes irreversible, internal damage has already occurred. Some mushrooms are farmed and cultivated on an enormous commercial scale for food production worldwide. Species such as the common white button mushroom are grown commercially in enormous quantities, cultivated under carefully controlled conditions specifically designed to encourage consistent, reliable fruiting, representing one of the more successful and widespread examples of large-scale fungal cultivation for human food supply. Mushrooms are naturally low in calories while offering a range of vitamins, minerals, and other beneficial nutrients. Many edible mushroom species provide meaningful nutritional value, including certain B vitamins and minerals such as selenium, while remaining relatively low in overall calories, contributing to their popularity as a nutritious addition within many different culinary traditions worldwide. Some mushrooms can produce their own vitamin D when exposed to sunlight or ultraviolet light. Similar in principle to how human skin produces vitamin D, certain mushroom species contain a compound that converts into vitamin D upon exposure to ultraviolet light. meaning mushrooms deliberately exposed to sunlight or UV light during cultivation can develop meaningfully higher vitamin D content compared to mushrooms grown entirely without such light exposure. Fungi produce a wide range of natural compounds that have proven valuable in modern medicine. Perhaps most famously, the antibiotic penicillin was originally derived from a mold, a type of fungus, marking one of the most significant medical discoveries of the 20th century and demonstrating the considerable pharmaceutical potential hidden within the broader fungal kingdom. Certain fungi are currently being studied for their potential to help break down plastic waste and other persistent environmental pollutants. Because some fungal species produce powerful enzymes capable of breaking down remarkably tough, complex materials, researchers have begun exploring their potential use in addressing certain forms of environmental pollution, including select types of plastic waste, an area of ongoing, still relatively early scientific investigation. Some fungi have been used experimentally to help clean up soil and water contaminated by pollutants, a process known as micromediation. By taking advantage of certain fungal species' natural ability to break down or absorb specific harmful compounds, researchers have explored using fungi as a potential tool for environmental cleanup efforts, an emerging, still developing area of applied fungal research with considerable future potential. Mushroom-based materials are being explored as a potential sustainable alternative to certain plastics and packaging materials. By carefully cultivating fungal mycelium into specific shapes and densities, researchers and companies have developed biodegradable packaging materials and other products derived largely from fungal growth, offering a potentially more environmentally sustainable alternative compared to certain traditional petroleum-based materials. Some architects and designers have experimented with using mycelium to create lightweight, biodegradable building materials. By growing mycelium within specific molds and then halting its growth at the right stage, researchers have successfully produced surprisingly sturdy, lightweight material suitable for various structural or decorative applications, representing a genuinely unusual and creative modern application of ancient fungal biology. Fungi were classified as their own separate biological kingdom relatively recently in the broader history of scientific classification. For a considerable period, fungi were often grouped together with plants under traditional scientific classification systems. It was only within the past several decades that fungi were more formally recognized as belonging to an entirely distinct biological kingdom of their own, separate and genetically distinct from both plants and animals. There are estimated to be well over 2 million distinct fungal species on Earth, though only a relatively small fraction have been formally identified and described by scientists so far. Despite fungi playing an enormous ecological role across nearly every terrestrial environment on the planet, the vast majority of estimated fungal species remain entirely undocumented, suggesting an enormous amount of fungal diversity still waiting to be properly studied and understood. Some fungi form parasitic relationships, deriving nutrients directly from a living host organism rather than decomposing dead material. Unlike many fungi that specialize in breaking down dead organic matter, certain parasitic fungal species instead infect and draw nutrients directly from a still living host, sometimes an insect, sometimes a plant, occasionally leading to dramatic and rather unsettling outcomes for the unfortunate host organism involved. A particular parasitic fungus can take control of an infected ant's behavior before eventually killing it. Certain fungi within the genus commonly referred to as zombie ant fungus are able to infect an ant, gradually altering its behavior in ways that benefit the fungus itself, ultimately guiding the ant to a location ideal for fungal spore dispersal before the ant dies and a fruiting body eventually emerges directly from its body. The zombie ant fungus reportedly compels an infected ant to climb to a very specific height and position before it dies. Researchers studying this unusual parasitic relationship have observed infected ants consistently climbing to a particular height and clamping down onto a leaf or stem in a specific, repeated position shortly before dying, apparently maximizing the eventual spread of fungal spores released from the ant's body afterward. Some fungi form beneficial partnerships with algae, together creating an entirely different type of organism known as lichen. Lichen represents a close, mutually beneficial partnership between a fungus and either algae or a specific type of photosynthetic bacteria, combined so closely together that the resulting organism functions, and is generally treated, as an entirely distinct entity separate from either partner organism on its own. Lichens can survive in some of the harshest environments found anywhere on Earth, including bare rock faces and extreme polar regions. Because of their unusual dual composition and remarkable resilience, lichens are able to survive and slowly grow in environments considered far too harsh for most other forms of life, including exposed rock surfaces in deserts and extremely cold polar regions largely devoid of typical plant growth. Some lichens grow so slowly that individual colonies may be many hundreds, or even thousands, of years old. Because certain lichen species grow at an extraordinarily slow rate, sometimes only a fraction of a millimeter per year, researchers have occasionally used the size of especially large, slow-growing lichen colonies to help estimate the age of the surface they're growing on, a technique sometimes referred to as lichenometry. Some fungi produce chemical compounds capable of altering human perception and consciousness. Certain mushroom species contain naturally occurring psychoactive compounds that have been used historically within various cultural and ceremonial contexts, and which are currently being studied by modern researchers for potential therapeutic applications related to certain mental health conditions, under carefully controlled clinical research settings. Fungi have been used in various traditional and ceremonial practices by different cultures throughout history. Long before modern scientific research began exploring their properties, certain mushroom species held meaningful cultural, spiritual, or ceremonial significance within various indigenous and traditional communities around the world, reflecting a long, complex human relationship with fungi extending well beyond simple culinary use alone. Yeast, one of the most familiar and widely used fungi in human history, has been essential to both baking and brewing for thousands of years. Though far smaller and less visually dramatic than a mushroom, yeast is itself a type of fungus, responsible for the fermentation processes underlying bread, beer, and wine production, making it one of the most economically and culturally significant fungal organisms throughout the entirety of recorded human history. Fungi can survive in environments considered extremely inhospitable to most other forms of life, including highly radioactive areas. Certain fungal species have been found thriving within the ruins of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster site, with some research suggesting these particular fungi may even be capable of using radiation as an energy source in a process loosely comparable to how plants use sunlight through photosynthesis. Some fungi appear capable of surviving in the harsh conditions found aboard the International Space Station. Fungal spores and small colonies have been documented surviving, and in some cases even growing, within the unusual environmental conditions found aboard orbiting spacecraft, raising both practical concerns regarding equipment maintenance and genuine scientific curiosity regarding fungal resilience in genuinely extreme environments. Mushrooms can grow in an extraordinarily wide range of habitats, from tropical rainforests to arid deserts to frozen tundra. Reflecting the sheer diversity found across the broader fungal kingdom, different mushroom species have adapted to thrive within nearly every terrestrial environment found on Earth, each uniquely suited to the particular temperature, moisture, and available organic material found within their specific local habitat. Desert-dwelling fungi have adapted specific strategies to cope with extremely limited water availability. Certain fungal species found in arid desert environments have developed specialized adaptations allowing them to remain largely dormant during extended dry periods, springing rapidly into active growth only during the relatively brief windows following occasional desert rainfall. Some mushrooms release their spores using a surprisingly forceful, rapid mechanism. Certain fungal species use a specialized mechanism capable of rapidly launching individual spores away from the mushroom's surface at considerable acceleration, helping ensure spores travel far enough away from the parent mushroom to avoid excessive competition for the very same limited nearby growing space. A mushroom's cap shape and structure often reflect specific adaptations related to spore dispersal strategy. The particular shape of a mushroom's cap, whether flat, conical, or otherwise, along with the internal structures responsible for producing spores, often reflect specific evolutionary adaptations aimed at optimizing exactly how and when spores are eventually released into the surrounding air or water. Puffball mushrooms release their spores in a visible cloud when disturbed, sometimes by rainfall or a passing animal. Rather than more gradual spore release, puffball mushrooms accumulate enormous quantities of spores internally, releasing them suddenly and dramatically in a visible puff when the outer surface is disturbed by rain, wind, or physical contact, an unusually visible and immediate example of fungal spore dispersal in action. Some fungi produce mushrooms that mimic the appearance and scent of rotting meat in order to attract flies for spore dispersal. Certain unusual fungal species have evolved to closely resemble both the appearance and unpleasant odor of decaying flesh, deliberately attracting flies and other carrion-seeking insects that unknowingly help disperse fungal spores after briefly investigating the deceptive, cleverly mimicked mushroom. Mushrooms can appear in surprisingly large, ring-shaped formations sometimes called fairy rings. As mycelium spreads outward from a central starting point in a roughly circular pattern, mushrooms occasionally fruit specifically along the outer edge of this expanding underground network, producing a visible ring formation that inspired considerable folklore across various cultures long before the underlying fungal biology was properly understood. Fairy rings can gradually expand outward over many years as the underlying fungal network continues growing. Because the ring shape reflects the outward spreading edge of an underlying mycelial network, fairy rings often grow gradually wider year after year, sometimes reaching remarkably large diameters after many decades of continuous, quiet underground expansion. Some fungi form specific, exclusive partnerships with only a single particular tree species, unable to successfully grow in association with any other type of tree. Certain mycorrhizal fungi have evolved such a specialized relationship with one specific tree species that they are essentially unable to establish a successful partnership with any other type of tree, reflecting an extremely close, tightly covalved relationship developed between that particular fungus and its one specific host tree species. Mushrooms typically thrive in cool, damp conditions, which is part of why they tend to appear more frequently during autumn in many temperate regions. Because fungal fruiting is often triggered by a specific combination of adequate moisture and cooler temperatures, many temperate region mushroom species tend to produce their visible fruiting bodies most abundantly during autumn, when seasonal rainfall and cooling temperatures align favorably with their particular growth requirements. Some fungi can remain almost entirely dormant for years, only fruiting into visible mushrooms when environmental conditions finally become favorable enough. Rather than fruiting predictably every single year, certain fungal species may remain in a largely dormant, non-fruiting state for extended periods, only producing visible mushrooms when a particularly favorable combination of moisture, temperature, and other environmental factors happens to align. The relationship between fungi and insects extends well beyond simple parasitism, including several genuinely cooperative partnerships as well. Certain ant and termite species actively cultivate specific fungi within their nests, deliberately providing plant material for the fungus to break down in exchange for a reliable, cultivated food source, representing a form of fungal agriculture practiced by insects long before humans ever developed farming of their own. Leafcutter ants are well known for cultivating a specific type of fungus as their primary food source. Rather than eating the leaves they cut and carry back to their colony directly, leafcutter ants instead use the collected leaf material to cultivate a specific fungus within their nest, feeding on the fungus itself as their primary nutritional source, an intricate agricultural partnership that has likely persisted for millions of years. Termite colonies in certain regions similarly cultivate fungi within specialized structures built specifically for that purpose. Much like leafcutter ants, certain termite species construct dedicated fungal cultivation chambers within their elaborate nest structures, carefully maintaining ideal conditions to support a cultivated fungal food source that plays an essential role in the termite colony's overall diet and survival. Some fungi produce compounds that can influence the growth and behavior of nearby plants. Certain fungal species release specific chemical compounds into surrounding soil capable of influencing nearby plant root development, occasionally either promoting or inhibiting the growth of particular neighboring plant species, adding yet another subtle, chemically mediated layer to the broader web of underground ecological relationships fungi participate in. Mushrooms can be surprisingly resilient, capable of pushing through surprisingly dense material such as pavement or compacted soil as they emerge. Despite their generally soft, delicate appearance once fully grown, developing mushrooms can generate a surprising amount of physical pressure while emerging, occasionally strong enough to crack or lift small sections of pavement or otherwise compacted ground as they push their way upward toward the surface. Fungi lack chlorophyll and therefore cannot produce their own energy through photosynthesis the way plants do. Because fungi cannot generate energy directly from sunlight, they instead rely entirely on absorbing nutrients from their surrounding environment, whether by breaking down dead organic material, forming a beneficial partnership with a living plant, or in rarer cases, parasitizing another living organism directly. Fungal cell walls are made primarily of a substance called chitin, the very same material found in the exoskeletons of insects and crustaceans. This shared structural material further reflects the closer biological relationship between fungi and animals compared to plants, whose cell walls are instead built primarily from an entirely different substance called cellulose. Some fungi can form intricate, visible patterns within decaying wood, sometimes called spalting, prized by woodworkers for decorative purposes. As certain fungi break down wood internally, they can leave behind distinctive dark lines and patterns marking the boundaries between different competing fungal colonies, creating a naturally occurring decorative effect that some woodworkers specifically seek out and deliberately encourage for use in fine woodworking projects. Fungi contribute significantly to soil health well beyond simple decomposition, including helping improve soil structure and water retention. Extensive fungal networks help bind soil particles together, generally improving overall soil structure, stability, and its capacity to retain moisture, contributing meaningfully to broader soil health in ways that extend considerably beyond their more commonly recognized role in decomposing dead organic material. Some fungi are now being studied specifically for their potential role in helping restore damaged or depleted agricultural soil. Researchers have explored deliberately introducing specific beneficial fungal species into agricultural soil as a potential method for improving soil health, supporting plant growth, and reducing dependence on certain chemical fertilizers, an area of ongoing agricultural research with potentially significant long-term environmental benefits. Mushroom hunting, sometimes called foraging, has become an increasingly popular recreational activity in many parts of the world. Alongside its long history as a practical food-gathering activity, mushroom foraging has grown considerably in popularity as a recreational pursuit in recent years, drawing people out into forests and natural areas specifically to search for, identify, and occasionally responsibly harvest wild mushroom species. Experienced mushroom foragers generally emphasize the importance of thorough, careful identification before ever considering consuming any wild harvested mushroom. Because the consequences of misidentifying a toxic mushroom species can be genuinely severe, experienced foragers consistently stress the importance of careful, thorough identification, often recommending that beginners rely heavily on guidance from experienced local experts rather than identification guides alone. Some regions host organized mushroom foraging clubs and societies dedicated specifically to sharing local expertise and promoting safe identification practices. In many parts of the world, dedicated local mycological societies bring together both amateur and professional mushroom enthusiasts, offering guided walks, identification workshops, and a supportive community environment specifically focused on safely and knowledgeably exploring the local fungal world together. Fungi form an essential, foundational part of nearly every terrestrial ecosystem on the planet, despite often going largely unnoticed. Quietly working beneath the surface of forests, grasslands, and countless other environments, fungi perform essential ecological functions, including decomposition, nutrient cycling, and forming vital partnerships with plants, functions so fundamental that most terrestrial ecosystems would struggle to function at all without them. Mushrooms can vary enormously in size, from tiny structures barely visible without careful observation to massive specimens weighing many pounds. While many familiar mushrooms are relatively small and easily overlooked, certain species, particularly some bracket fungi growing on tree trunks, can grow remarkably large, occasionally reaching sizes and weights that genuinely surprise those encountering them for the very first time. Bracket fungi, sometimes called shelf fungi, grow directly outward from tree trunks in a distinctive flattened, shelf-like shape. Rather than the familiar cap and stem shape most people associate with mushrooms, bracket fungi instead grow in a flattened, layered formation extending directly outward from the bark of living or dead trees, sometimes persisting and slowly growing for many years in the very same location. Some bracket fungi can be used to produce natural dyes, historically valued within certain traditional crafting and textile practices. Certain fungal species have historically been used as a source of natural dye, capable of producing a range of colors depending on the specific species and the particular preparation method used, reflecting yet another practical, historically significant human use for fungi extending well beyond food alone. Fungi were likely among the very first organisms on Earth to develop networks resembling something like communication between individuals. Given how extensively certain fungal networks appear capable of transmitting chemical signals across considerable distances underground, some researchers have suggested that fungi may represent one of the earliest evolutionary examples of anything resembling a communication network, long predating the nervous systems eventually developed by animals. Mushrooms remain, even after considerable scientific study, a genuinely underexplored area of biology, with vast fungal diversity still waiting to be properly documented. Despite their essential ecological role and long history of human use, the fungal kingdom remains considerably less thoroughly studied compared to plants and animals, meaning an enormous amount of fungal diversity, behavior, and ecological function likely still remains entirely undiscovered, quietly waiting beneath the surface of forests everywhere. Some fungi produce mushrooms shaped strikingly like coral, branching outward into delicate, intricate structures rather than the familiar cap and stem form. Coral fungi display a distinctive, branching growth pattern reminiscent of ocean coral, adding yet another example of the sheer visual diversity found across the broader fungal kingdom, considerably removed from the more familiar mushroom shapes most people typically picture by default. Certain fungi form mushrooms shaped like small, delicate cups, sometimes brightly colored and often found growing directly on decaying wood or leaf litter. These cup-shaped fungi, technically classified among a distinct group of species, display their spore-producing surface along the interior curve of the cup shape, a structural adaptation suited specifically to their particular method of spore release into the surrounding air. Morel mushrooms, prized by many foragers for their distinctive, honeycomb-like appearance and rich flavor, typically appear for only a brief window each spring. Because morels tend to fruit predictably during a relatively narrow springtime window, dedicated foragers often plan seasonal outings specifically around this brief, eagerly anticipated period, timing their search carefully to coincide with the particular combination of temperature and moisture morels generally require. Truffles, among the most highly valued fungi in the culinary world, grow entirely underground rather than producing a visible above-ground mushroom at all. Unlike most familiar mushrooms, truffles develop their fruiting body entirely beneath the soil surface, relying on animals to dig them up and disperse their spores, a strategy that has made them considerably more difficult, and consequently more valuable, for humans to locate and harvest. Specially trained dogs, and historically pigs, are used to help locate valuable truffles hidden beneath the soil surface. Because truffles release a distinctive scent detectable by animals with a sufficiently sensitive sense of smell, trained dogs are commonly used today to help foragers locate buried truffles, a practice that has largely replaced the earlier historical use of trained pigs for the very same purpose. Some fungi produce mushrooms with a distinctly unpleasant taste or texture specifically to discourage animals from eating them before their spores have had time to mature. Just as some plants develop unpalatable qualities to deter grazing animals, certain fungal species appear to have evolved similarly unappealing tastes or textures, potentially helping protect the developing mushroom from being consumed prematurely, before its spores are fully ready for release. Fungi can reproduce both sexually, through the combination of genetic material from two compatible individuals, and asexually, through simpler forms of cloning-like reproduction. This flexible reproductive strategy allows many fungal species to spread relatively quickly under favorable conditions through simpler asexual methods, while still maintaining genetic diversity within the broader population through occasional sexual reproduction as well. Some fungi require a compatible mating partner of a different, though still closely related, type before successful sexual reproduction can occur. Rather than simply requiring two individuals of the same species, certain fungi possess a genuinely complex system involving many distinct mating types, sometimes numbering considerably more than the two sexes typically found among most familiar animals, adding an additional layer of biological complexity to fungal reproduction. Some species of fungi have been found to possess an unusually large number of distinct mating types, occasionally numbering in the thousands. Certain fungal species, including some studied specifically for this reason, have been documented possessing an extraordinarily large number of distinct compatible mating types, a genuinely unusual reproductive complexity rarely matched anywhere else across the broader animal or plant kingdoms. Mushrooms typically consist of over 90% water by weight, contributing to their characteristically soft, easily damaged texture. Because mushrooms rely so heavily on rapid water absorption during their relatively brief above-ground growth phase, their overall composition tends to be dominated by water content, explaining both their soft, delicate texture and their tendency to shrink considerably when dried for storage or later use. Dried mushrooms can be rehydrated and used in cooking long after their original harvest, thanks to their naturally high original water content. Because so much of a mushroom's original mass consists of water that can be safely removed through drying and later reintroduced, dried mushrooms remain a practical, long-lasting way to preserve and later use fungi that would otherwise spoil relatively quickly if simply left in their fresh state. Some fungi produce a distinctive, earthy compound called geosmin, closely associated with the familiar smell of rain on dry soil. While often associated primarily with soil bacteria, certain fungi also contribute to the production of geosmin, a compound humans are remarkably sensitive to detecting even in extremely small concentrations, helping explain why the scent following rainfall often carries such a distinctly recognizable earthy quality. Fungi contribute significantly to the distinctive smell often associated with autumn forests, particularly following rainfall. As fungal activity typically increases during the cooler, damper conditions common in autumn, the associated compounds released during active fungal growth and decomposition likely contribute meaningfully to the particular earthy, organic scent many people closely associate with walking through a forest during the autumn season. Some fungi can be trained, in a loose sense, to grow in specific directions or patterns by carefully controlling their environmental conditions during cultivation. Researchers and mycelium-based product designers have found that carefully adjusting factors such as light, humidity, and available surface area can meaningfully influence the direction and pattern of fungal growth, allowing a degree of practical control over the final shape and structure of a cultivated fungal material. Mushroom cultivation has been practiced by humans for many centuries, with early historical records describing deliberate fungal farming practices in various regions. Long before modern commercial mushroom farming became widespread, various historical societies developed early techniques for deliberately cultivating specific fungal species, reflecting a surprisingly long and considerably underappreciated history of human fungal agriculture extending back many centuries. Some fungi form associations with orchids so specific and essential that certain orchid seeds cannot successfully germinate without the presence of the correct fungal partner. Unlike many plants capable of germinating independently, many orchid species rely on a specific mycorrhizal fungal partner during their earliest developmental stages, a close, essential relationship without which the orchid seed would likely never successfully develop into a mature plant at all. Fungi can influence the flavor and character of certain foods well beyond mushrooms themselves, including cheese, soy sauce, and various fermented products. Beyond their direct culinary use as mushrooms, various fungal species play an essential behind-the-scenes role in producing many familiar fermented foods, contributing distinctive flavors and textures through carefully controlled fungal fermentation processes refined over many centuries of culinary tradition. Blue cheese owes its distinctive appearance and flavor directly to a specific type of mold deliberately introduced during the cheesemaking process. The characteristic blue-green veining found throughout blue cheese comes from a specific fungal species deliberately introduced and carefully cultivated within the cheese during production, transforming an ordinary cheese into something with a distinctly different flavor and appearance through carefully controlled fungal growth. Some fungi can survive being frozen solid, resuming normal activity once conditions warm again. Certain cold-adapted fungal species are capable of surviving extended periods of freezing temperatures, entering a form of dormancy that allows them to resume active growth once favorable warmer conditions eventually return, an adaptation particularly useful for fungi living within colder seasonal or geographic environments. Fungi are believed to have played an important ecological role following the mass extinction event that eliminated most dinosaurs. Some researchers have proposed that fungi capable of decomposing dead organic material may have temporarily flourished in the aftermath of the extinction event that eliminated the dinosaurs, taking advantage of the sudden widespread availability of dead plant and animal material requiring decomposition across a dramatically changed landscape. Some ancient fungal fossils suggest certain prehistoric fungi may have grown to towering heights, far taller than any fungus found on Earth today. Fossil evidence of an ancient organism called prototaxite suggests it may have grown as tall as several meters, and while its exact classification remains debated among researchers, some have proposed it may represent an extraordinarily large ancient fungus, far exceeding the size of any mushroom-producing fungus found in the modern world. Mushrooms continue to surprise researchers with newly discovered species and previously unknown ecological relationships, even in relatively well-studied regions. Despite centuries of accumulated human observation and study, researchers continue to identify entirely new fungal species and uncover previously undocumented ecological relationships on a regular basis, a quiet reminder that the fungal kingdom remains, even today, a genuinely active and rewarding frontier for ongoing scientific discovery. As our journey through the hidden world of mushrooms comes to a close, perhaps the forest floor feels a little different now. Not simply a scattering of small, quiet caps rising briefly from the soil, but the visible tip of something vast, patient, and largely unseen, threading quietly through the dark beneath every root, every fallen log, every quiet stretch of forest we have ever casually walked across. We've drifted through networks older than most recorded human history, past mushrooms that glow softly in complete darkness, past ants unknowingly farming fungus underground long before humans ever thought to farm anything themselves. Somewhere beneath the ground tonight, a single quiet network is still spreading, patiently, silently, exactly as it has for longer than anyone watching this video has been alive. Now you can let all of that drift softly into the background. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the images fade from bright detail into something softer and more distant, like a small white cap closing gently beneath fallen leaves at the end of a long, quiet day. And if you enjoyed this journey, perhaps you might like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps other curious minds find their way here, too, one quiet spore at a time. And if you happen to still be awake, there will be another slow journey waiting for you on the screen, another hidden corner of the natural world to drift into quietly. But for now, let your mind grow still, and let the day fall away. Sleep well, and good night.